Hi everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz. Welcome to this rental kitchen that we're in while my house is baby central. But I'm so excited to be back with episodes of Dessert Person. Today we're making chicken pot pie, truly one of the ultimate comfort dishes, and I'm very excited because the weather could not be worse. It's like chilly outside and icy. We're gonna make some homemade puff pastry, which you don't have to do if you don't want to, but it just kind of makes it extra special, and it's gonna be so delicious, and it's exactly what I want to eat today. Pot pies I really love because it is, to me, the perfect intersection of cooking and baking. So I wrote an entire book about baking. I wrote, two books about baking. I wrote Dessert Person, and if you read the things in Dessert Person that aren't the recipes, you'll listen to me talk a lot about how baking and cooking are not that different when people think that they're totally separate things. I'll hear someone say, I'm a cook, but I'm not a baker. And I'm like, they bleed into one another. And the principles are very much the same. So I love a savory bake like this because the whole idea is that it's cooking and baking. I have my ingredients over here for the pot pie filling, and then I have my ingredients over here for the puff pastry. You could use a store-bought puff pastry. You could use a store-bought pie crust. You could use a homemade pie crust if you have a pie crust recipe that you really like. But it did occur to me that in all the years we've been doing Dessert Person video that I don't think I've shown you a traditional puff pastry. I think I've shown you rough puff, which I have a recipe for, but today we're gonna show you a true puff pastry just for the sake of it. So for the filling, I have 2 pounds of boneless, skinless chicken thigh. I will talk in the recipe about taking in a shortcut if you want to use already cooked chicken, from a store-bought rotisserie or leftover chicken. You could do that. I'm using thighs because in a sense what happens is the meat kind of braises as you bake it, and so I wanted something that would not be too dry, so I'm using dark meat chicken. You can use chicken breast if you want to. I have my aromatics. I have celery, carrots, onion, some thyme, a bay leaf, parsley. I have frozen peas, very classic for going into a chicken pot pie. Then I have some butter, flour, that's what's gonna thicken the mixture, some white wine, give it a little acidity, heavy cream. So then last I have 4 cups of chicken bone broth by Kettle Fire, and this is gonna give a ton of body to the filling and a nice silkiness, and you don't have to use homemade, which I love. Then ingredients for the puff pastry. So here I have some all-purpose flour, plus a little bit more over here just for sprinkling on the bench for rolling. I have 2 sticks of butter, plus 50 grams at room temp, and just some water. Then for the final assembly, I have an egg. That's gonna do some egg wash over top. Okay, so special equipment, not really. I have a Dutch oven here that I'm gonna cook the filling in, and then we're gonna bake everything in a skillet. And then just a rolling pin for the pastry, a pastry brush, pretty basic stuff. That's it. No no major mixer or anything. Oh, I forgot Tabasco. That's gonna season my filling. Before I get into the recipe, I want to thank our friends at Kettle Fire for sponsoring this episode. So Kettle Fire is the maker of the first shelf-stable bone broth. Their bone broth is cooked for 14 plus hours. So while I love making broth and stock at home, not always practical to make a bone broth, their ingredients are amazing. When you look at the ingredient list, it's all stuff that you might have in your own kitchen at home. The beef version has grass-fed and finished beef bones. Chicken is free-range organic chicken, plus everything has organic veggies. So very, very high quality product. I like to use it in cooking instead of using homemade because it has a ton of collagen and protein, so it adds lots of body. That's why I'm using it in my chicken pot pie. It's gonna make the filling so silky and delicious. So if you go to the link in the description below, you can get more info on all the Kettle Fire products, plus 20% off your order. And I just want to say thank you for sponsoring this episode. And now back to the recipe. If you can, I really recommend you making both the pastry and the filling in advance. I have a swap for both that I made yesterday, and that's because both really benefit from being very cold when you start in terms of assembling and getting into the oven. I'll talk about why. So I have swaps of both. But for now, I'm going to kind of go back and forth between the two because there's like some cook time and some resting time. So the first thing I want to do is start to actually poach my chicken. I'm going to cook it before I put it into the filling. For a couple reasons, I'm not going to cook it in the filling because I want to basically take it out and shred it, but that means that you have an opportunity to use already cooked chicken if that's what you have around, like cooked chicken breast or like a rotisserie chicken, or maybe your roasted chicken at home. So I have 2 pounds, so starting from raw. So I'm actually gonna start this behind me on the stove, and I'm gonna have the filling going while I have my warm stock and chicken over here, and that's because I wanna put the stock in my filling warm. So I'm gonna get that into the skillet behind me. And I'm not gonna add any salt to this because I'm gonna season the filling later on. And this house has no tongs. I mean, I'll just, oh. I mean, technically it's tongs. Okay, so I have the stock at the moment over high heat. Oops, that's the wrong burner. Because I want to bring up the temperature. But then I'll turn it down once it starts to simmer. And I'm going to put in my chicken. Again, I haven't seasoned this. It's going to all get seasoned when it goes into the filling. Tiny tongs. So I just need to cook this until the thighs are cooked through, and again using dark meat because it's not going to dry out and it's going to kind of braise in the filling and not, you know, get dry. Boneless, skinless. You could use white meat if you want. So I'm going to let that come up to a simmer, and then I'll turn it down to like a very gentle simmer, and so the chicken can cook through. I'll turn it if I need to, but it's basically submerged. And even if you weren't poaching your chicken in the stock beforehand, you actually would still want to warm up your stock on the stove, and that's because I'm going to make a roux, and it works better if the liquid is warm when you add it to the filling. So just keep that in mind. While that's happening, I'm going to start on my puff pastry. This is 300 grams of all-purpose flour. The dough component has a little bit of fat in it. This is 50 grams of room temp butter. So I'm gonna add that. Then I need 6 grams of kosher salt, which is like approximately 2 teaspoons. Just gonna kind of eyeball it because somebody forgot her scale at home. Then I have 170 grams of water, which is like a very scant 3/4 of a cup. So now I want to bring this together. You can also use melted and cooled butter. This is just room temp, but I'm going to just use my hands to work the butter into the flour mixture. You could do this in a stand mixer. But actually with this style of pastry, I'm not making a well-developed dough, meaning I'm not going to work the dough for a particularly long time in order to develop gluten. That actually kind of happens on its own as you roll out the pastry. So this does not need to be like a particularly smooth dough at this early stage. I just want to work the butter in until it sort of disappears into the flour. So you sort of intentionally underdevelop the dough because all of the rolling and folding and resting that happens will make it smooth out. Really the key with puff pastry is you want to have the dough and the butter block be the same, I would say texture, but really like the same firmness. You want like a relatively soft dough that is going to roll out similar to the way the butter is going to roll out. So this is a soft dough, but not a sticky dough. Okay, so this is all worked. I'm going to now add my water. I think some recipes call for milk. There's no reason really to use milk. Where were the silverware? Aha. Okay. I'm just going to bring this together. Again, doing this by hand. Puff pastry, while it's, you know, a process, and it's definitely sort of among the more complicated recipes, is very doable by hand. It's also kind of nice that it's cold in here and it's winter because it helps to do this in a cool environment. You want to keep everything really cold throughout the whole process. So the fact that we're in like an old farmhouse kitchen and it's snowing outside actually kind of helps. So you can see it's looking pretty shaggy. I'm gonna get everything out of the bowl. I'm just gonna turn this down to like medium low and use my tiny tongs to rotate, turn the pieces over.
Would you hearing the sound? To, like, to mix stocks, like if you used like a beef stock to do this part, would that be good or bad?
I think that would be fine. It's sort of like less of chicken pot pie at that point, but
the flavor would be very noticeable.
Probably. I think you would notice it, but it would still be very tasty, I think. That's just going to be at a gentle simmer so the chicken can cook through. I'm going to turn out my dough mixture onto the work surface. So I'm going to now just work this together with my hands, and it's going to pick up this loose flour. Now, as a general rule of thumb, anytime you're working with a dough, It's easier to add flour than it is to add moisture. So the dough leans a little bit on the soft side, and you can always add flour if there's a bit of stickiness. It's just a lot harder to add moisture once you bring it together. So I just really want to work this until the flour is incorporated and it no longer looks so dry and shaggy. But then that's pretty much it. I'm not going to go beyond that. Again, it's going to really smooth out a lot in the rolling process. It's always a thing where like you think the dough seems really dry once you add the liquid, but it takes a little while for the flour to hydrate, and then usually it comes together. So don't think like, it's just gonna seem like it's not enough liquid, but it is. So I have my bench scraper here. This is just about there. You can see I've picked up most of the flour. And that bit of fat in the dough is a tenderizer. So with puff pastry, as with a lot of different types of dough, you need this balance between strength and tenderness. The strength to like extend as you're rolling, and the tenderness because you don't want you want a tender, crisp, shattering pastry and not like a tough pastry. This feels really good. You can see it's like a little cracked and like slightly dry looking on the surface, but this is gonna hydrate as it rests. So I'm gonna actually just set this back in the bowl and kind of form it into a ball, just like so. Everything is incorporated, but it's quite like mottled looking on the surface. So I didn't, continue to work this until it's smooth. I'm gonna set this in the bowl, cover it. This is gonna rest for about 20 minutes because we want the gluten that I did develop to relax a little bit. I'm gonna now make my butter block. So I've scaled it around the butter block. So the butter block is 2 sticks of butter, that's 8 ounces, or half a pound. So it just makes the math a little bit easier. So I have 2 sticks of butter here. Sometimes what I end up doing is like I cut the butter into pieces. I'm not gonna do that this time, it doesn't really matter. Now, you wanna use a high quality butter because that is what is the flavor of the pastry. If you can find like a European or European style butter, that's better because it has a slightly higher fat content. And generally speaking, that higher fat content gives the butter a slightly more plastic quality, plastic meaning like malleable, and that's what you want. So you want the butter to roll out evenly in a single layer and not like shatter into pieces, especially when it's cold. So this is fridge temp butter, but it had been sitting out, so it's maybe like not quite as cold. I'm just gonna put the pieces side by side. Now I have my rolling pin. And what I'm gonna first do is beat the butter. I'm gonna kind of just roughly kind of wrap it up in the parchment and use my rolling pin just to sort of soften it without it having to warm up. So the idea here is to make literally a block of butter. I'm gonna try to get it into a square. The dimensions actually really are not that important. It just has to be square, and it should be less than a 1/2 inch thick, between sort of 1/4 and 1/2. So what I'm gonna do, I did notice that this kitchen has a small offset spatula, and I'm gonna use this to kind of work the butter. I'm going to stack these sticks so that they really stick together, and maybe even do it like this. Okay, so once you have the butter somewhat flattened, this is where you want to now pay attention to the dimensions. So I have it down to about a 1/2 inch thick. And now, rather than just kind of gathering up the parchment, I'm going to be pretty precise about folding it into a nice square packet. So the actual size is less important than the overall thickness and just it being a square. So just equal sides all the way around. So I'm trying to make sure that the sides are parallel at the moment. I'm gonna kind of use this to eyeball the length and width. I folded it up, and now I'm positioning it folded side down just so that it stays and keeps its shape. all of this beating makes the butter moldable or malleable, so you can kind of start to roll rather than just beat. And you don't want to beat too hard because you don't want to break the parchment paper. But I'm just rolling it into any places where there's like an air gap. And you want to make the butter block relatively thin because that is going to make it easier to start to roll out your pastry thin. But you also don't want to necessarily make it too thin because then it's going to warm up faster. So it's a little bit of a dance, but actually a lot of problems can be solved by just working in a cool environment. I'm going to fold up that last little side. So here I have my packet. It's square, relatively. And now I just want to make sure that the butter is filling in all of the spaces so that the butter itself is perfectly square inside of the parchment. So I'm just kind of forcing it into the corners. And if you need to, if you feel like at any point it's losing its shape, what you can do is you can unwrap it, use your spatula or your bench scraper to sort of like mush it back into place, and then rewrap it. So like if your sides are no longer parallel for whatever reason, okay. But this is looking pretty good. Okay. You can do this well in advance also, and just keep it in the fridge. I'm gonna get this in the fridge, and it's gonna stay cold while I wait for my dough to rest, and then we're going to move on to the next step of pastry, which is enveloping the butter block in the dough and doing the first turn. We're gonna do 4 turns, and I'm gonna explain what that means. 4. Where do you wanna go? There, okay. There goes the plow. Okay, our dough is rested. Dough, AKA the détrempe. There is a very specific step that I'm going to show you. I'm going to put down a little bit of excess flour. The dough is soft, but I mean maybe slightly tacky, but not sticky. I'm going to use this knife and I'm going to cut a large X through it. And this is going to help me to reorient the dough into a square because that's what we need. We have our butter block in a square. We need the dough to be a square. So this is going to, now I can kind of use these points to make like corners. So I'm going to kind of push the dough out. And throughout this entire process, maintaining as much of a kind of squared off or rectangular shape as possible is very important. So now I have my rolling pin. And because we aired on the side of like a softer dough, you don't have to actually be shy about adding flour. So I'm gonna roll this into a square shape, and you want the thickness to be pretty even. I'm gonna grab my butter block. You want the dough to be about the same texture as the butter. So like this is soft, there's a firmness to it, but it's soft, like I can put my fingerprints into it, and you want your butter to be the same. Now this butter was not like super fridge cold when I made the butter block, and it hasn't been chilling that long. So like there is a kind of flexibility to it. So I think this is, I can go ahead and use this. If you take your butter block out of the fridge and you feel like it would crack if you bent it, it needs to temper a little bit. So again, you just want like the firmness of the dough and the firmness of the butter to be the same. But I think I'm ready to go. Now I want to place the butter block in the middle of the dough, but with the points not aligned. I want basically the butter to be a square in the middle of a diamond of dough. So I need to make the dough a little bit bigger. Roll it out a bit more. It is 45, right? Yeah, because 90 would be aligned. I want the butter to sort of come to the edges of the dough. So again, I have to make it a little bit bigger. And this is why you want that dough to rest, because you need it to roll out and to not spring back on you. Okay, so here I am. This is not like the most perfect diamond shape, but that's really okay. So now I'm going to unwrap my butter block. And I think the easiest thing to do is to leave it on the parchment on one side and use the parchment to place it onto your dough. Do you see how it sticks? So I'm going to place it down, lining it up where I want it to go. And then, see, honestly, this is a little on the soft side. And we're going to take away the parchment. Now, I think this part is really fun. This is that enveloping step. So now we are going to take the dough on these 4 points and bring them toward the center of the butter. This is going to totally encase the butter, and it's going to also make it so that there's an equal thickness of dough on the top, like above and below the butter. So you can tug as you need to get the dough to meet along those 4 sides, and make sure that you are pinching really, really well. So you want to pinch together.
Is this easy, or are you just good at it?
The dough is easy to work with, and as long as your temperatures are okay, like this part is not hard, but I would say that I'm probably making it look a little bit easier to get the dimensions right. There is no butter showing. There's no butter peeking out. And I'm really taking a lot of care to make sure that the seams are really well sealed. If at any point you feel like things feel a little warm, get it in the fridge. Like, better to take longer at this process than to try to rush it. I'm gonna put a little more flour on the work surface, and I'm gonna do what's called the first turn. So a turn really refers to the kind of rolling out and folding. And the number of turns is what determines the number of layers. So right now I have dough, butter, dough. I'm gonna roll it out and fold it, and then that's gonna multiply those layers, and that is what creates the flaky effect. And this is where you really wanna take a lot of care to keep the dough as rectangular and like squared off as possible. So I do a lot of like, kind of like fussing with it, just to thin it out a little bit. I like to do that like tapping motion with the pin. I'm already getting a rounded edge, which I don't like. So I'm gonna kind of take a little bit of time to try to square off those corners. One tip for keeping square corners is to take the rolling pin and like press down on that edge and roll away from you. Okay, so now I'm going to roll this out, and I want to get this into a nice, long, somewhat narrow rectangle. When you roll out pastry like this, don't think about pressing down, think about like pushing away from you. That really tends to help you to lengthen the dough. And so if it works better that you just like to push away, then you can just rotate the dough to get there. If you feel like the dough is springing back on you, which this is a little bit because frankly I could have let the dough rest a tiny bit longer, then it's best to throw it in the fridge and let it rest for a little bit. But I think I can get through that first turn. You can see sort of streaks of butter under the dough, but there's no butter peeking out. Like it's all dough, which is what you want. So you can see I've rolled it but pretty much to the length of the work surface. I'm ready to do a fold, and what you could do is just what's called a basic letter fold, which is where you roll in thirds. So you take the bottom third of the dough, fold it up to the center, then you take the top third and fold that down. But I'm actually going to do something slightly different because it's going to help with the overall shape of the dough. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to trim off the bottom a little bit. And what you end up getting with that first turn is that this is pretty much only dough and not butter, because you have like a thickness of dough all the way around. So what you end up trimming off is really more dough than butter. I think this is called a book fold. I can't remember the name of this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the midline, so call it right here, and I'm going to fold the top down to the midline. And this is where it's better if it's square. So I kind of take some extra care to like position the dough in a straight line. Then I'm going to take the bottom and fold it up to the midline, leaving a little bit of a gap. And again, you can do some tugging as needed to get everything even. And then I'm going to fold it in half again. So bring this down. And when you see it from this side, you see there's 1, 2, 3, 4 layers of dough. So now it's dough, butter. Well, technically it's dough, butter, dough, butter, dough, butter, dough. The point is, we've now multiplied all those layers. Now, if I had let this rest really well, I could probably get away with doing a second turn. So that was turn 1. We're gonna do 3 more turns for a total of 4. I might be able to get away with going right into the second turn, but I can tell that this is gonna spring back on me. So you can try to kind of, you know, give it a slight head start at this stage and like thinning it out, but this needs to rest. So your best bet, if you're making this, is to really give it lots of time in the fridge between turns. Again, if you're like very experienced and or things are just working out great and it's nice and cold, you could do 2 turns, rest, and then 2 turns, and then you're done, but we'll see. Now, other recipes for puff pastry might call for like 6 turns, and you would actually think that more turns equals more flakiness, but it doesn't always necessarily translate that way, because what ends up happening is sometimes the dough gets so thin that the layers can almost like disappear, and you would like more turns actually ends up with like something that is perceived as less flaky, because it's just the texture is just more fine. So I'm gonna do 4 turns. That's what I think is the right number. So this is gonna go into the fridge. All right. The pastry is much firmer because it chilled for a nice long stretch. So the butter is cold, the dough is rested. It's gonna be much easier now to roll out again. So I'm gonna give it some flour. The dough, when I folded it, was oriented like this. An important aspect of turns is literally rotating the dough, so 90 degrees. So this is called the book. And you can see that there's kind of like the rounded side here and then the folded side here. So the idea is like if you opened it up like a book, you would be opening it to your left. So that's how you want to orient the dough. So this is how we're gonna now roll it out. This is going to be the second turn. We're gonna do what's called a letter fold. So that sort of tri-fold, it's rolling out very, very easily. And once I get to the point where it's basically the length of the rolling pin, I'm gonna actually try to roll it a little bit side to side to widen it slightly. Again, it's really more of a pushing motion than like a pressing down. Now this is gliding pretty well. I actually really like rolling on a wood surface. It does, I think, help to prevent sticking. But you do want to move the dough around to make sure that it's not sticking, because sometimes it lengthens purely out of friction with the surface, and then you like lift it up and it springs back. So this looks good. I'm gonna do my letter fold. And you can see that I actually have pretty nice square ends because of the way I did the first set of folds. So I'm gonna just go a third, the top third down into the center, and then the bottom third up. If you have a lot of excess flour from rolling, go ahead and wipe it off. So you can use like a pastry brush to do that, because that's gonna prevent it from sticking to itself. And then the bottom third up. Now it's really a judgment call if you can get away with doing another turn in succession. So the dough is pretty cold. The dough is gonna tell me if I can do another turn by how easily it's gonna roll out again. If it really starts to spring back or warm up, then it really has to go back into the fridge. Make sure you rotate it. So if I'm gonna do another turn, 90 degrees, so that I have my book opening to the left. So again, to sort of help to maintain straight square ends, that like kind of like mashing it down with the rolling pin helps. I think I can get away with another turn. And if you can't, roll it out to as like big a slab as you can, and then wrap it and chill it, and then come back to it. Even like a 15 or 20 minute rest will be enough. This is springing back a little bit. Let's see if I can make it happen with a little elbow grease. But as long as it's kind of 3 times as long as it is wide, and like not more than, I would say, a 1/4 inch thick, because then you just end up with something that becomes kind of thick to roll out. So now, letter fold again. This time I'll start from the bottom. take away the excess flour. Bottom third up. It doesn't really matter if you start with the top or the bottom. And again, I sort of tug on the dough to square it off. Then top third down. All right, the dough is still cold, but it's been worked quite a bit, so I have to get it back in the fridge. So I'm gonna wrap it up again. Look, you could call it at 3 turns and you'd have something like super, super flaky. But I'm gonna go ahead and wait and do one more, but not until I give this a good like 20-minute rest in the fridge. 20 minutes later, yeah, it's nice and cold again. You can see it's firmed up. So remember orienting it so that it opens to your left. And just repeating that exact same process. All right, so that rolled out really quickly and easily because it was rested. And now final letter fold. Okay, so now our puff pastry is complete. This is gonna go back in the fridge and you can keep it in the fridge for, I would say, a day or two. If you need it after that, I would put it in the freezer. This freezes really, really well, and then let it thaw overnight in the fridge so it's not frozen when you go to roll it out. But this is ready to go. So obviously we're using it for our pot pie crust, but this could be palmiers, any number of like dessert tarts. There's so many uses for puff pastry, and now you know how to make it yourself at home. If you are making this but you want to use it right away, I would give it at least, ideally like an hour in the fridge before you use it, just to make sure it's really, really relaxed. If you needed to, you could push it to maybe like 30 minutes. So you could use this right away, but it's best to let it hang out in the fridge. Dough is done, but I have a version that I made yesterday, so it's like really nice and cold and rested. I'm gonna grab that. I'm gonna grab my filling, which is also cold, and then show you how to put together and bake the pot pie. So I'm starting with my aromatics. I have a Dutch oven here. You could use a large saucepan or even like an 8-quart stock pot. It helps to have something with slightly taller sides. I'm gonna start prepping my veg. Yeah, the chicken is basically done. I can turn it off, but it's gonna stay hot. 2 medium carrots or 1 large. This peel is taking off like 25% of the carrot on each stroke. Look at how much it took off of this carrot.
Can you just leave the peel?
I could have just left the peel. And if you scrub it really well, it kind of scrubs off some of the peel. These were thin carrots, so I'm doing the equivalent of maybe like a medium dice. And my Dutch oven is definitely hot, so I'm gonna get my butter in. I'm starting with 4 tablespoons of unsalted butter. I'm gonna also do my onion. You could add other aromatics. You could do a leek. You could add garlic. I'm not doing garlic in this one. It's really up to you. But I don't feel like it adds a whole lot. So I'm gonna start getting my aromatics in so that the butter doesn't get too hot. So I have the heat on medium. I don't want to brown the vegetables. I just want to get them nice and soft.
So you don't believe in garlic in pot pies?
I do. I just didn't feel like I needed it here. You could definitely do garlic. I think if there's enough, onion and garlic, they kind of trade off if they can. It already smells really good. Okay, now my celery. So 1 large celery stalk, sort of 2 medium small. And Generally with aromatics, you just want everything to be sort of cut into relatively same size for cooking purposes, so it cooks evenly. So that's really most of the chopping. The only thing I have left to do is the parsley, which goes in at the end. So I'm going to turn this back up to medium. This is going to cook down. I have some fresh thyme here. I don't believe in the tedium of picking fresh thyme leaves, although you could probably find me in a video doing it previously, but I don't feel like doing it now. So I'm going to throw the sprigs in whole, and then I just pick out. Basically what happens is it cooks, the leaves fall off, and then I just fish out the stemmy pieces. So that's going to go in. And I'm going to throw in a bay leaf. Do bay leaves do anything? Who knows? I actually think that they do, but I think most people's bay leaves are so insanely old and dry that they don't have any flavor left. But like a real bay leaf like has flavor. So, you know, I want the vegetables to soften. They're going to lose a lot of volume. So that'll take 8 to 10 minutes. But again, you don't really want them to brown. So if they are browning, turn your heat down a bit. So while this is cooking down, the next thing I'm going to do is shred my chicken because it's cooked through. So the broth is still quite hot. You can see it's steaming. That's what you want. But I need to separate the chicken from the broth. So I'm going to pull that out. The broth is really key. That is what is making up the body of our filling. So do not get rid of it. And now it has even more chicken flavor because we poached the thighs in it. So I'm just going to get these onto a plate. So 2 pounds of thighs, I think, was 6 boneless, skinless thighs total. Getting a little brown, so I'm going to turn down the heat. So now what I want to do, God, the chicken smells really good. I'm going to add my wine. So white wine is like a classic thing to add to any kind of braisy, stewy kind of recipe like this. And what's nice, not only does it deglaze if you have like brown bits, but it's going to add a little acidity, which I think is very important in something like chicken pot pie, which is very rich. Okay, so this is a half a cup of white wine. It's gonna go in. And now I wanna let that fully cook down. Like the wine is going to evaporate almost entirely. God, sometimes it's really nice to cook not under a hood because you get all the good smells. Okay, so now I'm gonna start to shred my chicken. You can just use a fork or your fingers, or you can chop it up with a knife, but I like the shredding texture. And actually, boneless, skinless thighs are very easy to shred. Now, these are fully cooked through. If they weren't, it doesn't really matter because they are going to continue to cook in the filling. So the wine is 90% cooked off. There's really very little liquid on the bottom of the pot, which is what I want. I'm done shredding the chicken. I want to just run a knife quickly through it because there's some slightly longer pieces, and I want to just make sure everything is nice and bite-sized so it will fit on your... I guess you use a spoon for pot pie? Spoon or fork? Spoon.
Fork.
It's because it's fork. Spoon. Really? Team fork, team spoon. All right, I think that is nice in terms of the size. Now, I'm going to add my flour. So this is 7 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. So I'm just sprinkling this evenly over the veg. This is 7 tablespoons, so just under a half a cup. And now I want to stir this through. The idea is that the flour is adhering to all the veg, which is covered in a little bit of fat because I started with that butter. And I'm cooking the flour out. Once I see the flour starting to stick to the bottom of the pot, which it is, I'm ready to add my liquid. And that's why I want my broth to be hot, because when you're adding your liquid to your roux, you want the temperatures to be the same, which will help prevent lumps. So I'm gonna move the chicken out of the way and bring over my broth. So this is still hot. And you can see that the chicken has, there's like proteins and like little bits of chicken in the broth. It doesn't matter. That's totally fine. It will all kind of disappear into the texture of the filling. So now I'm going to start ladling this in. In the beginning, you want to go little by little, one ladle at a time, stirring. I have not added any salt, and that's because there's a certain amount of salt content in store-bought broth. You can start with like a low sodium if you want, but this is just like, you want to wait to season until after you've added your broth, so you have better control over the final saltiness. So you can see it's starting to create this thick kind of sauce. So once you've added like more than half your liquid, you no longer have lumps, everything's dissolved, so now I can just add the rest of it. I want to bring this up to a boil. That's important because I want the flour to fully thicken, and you need to bring it to a boil in order for that to happen. And I think with chicken pot pie, it can really run the spectrum from like brothy, almost soupy, to like very, very thick. And I want somewhere in the middle. I want it to be thick because it's not the same thing as chicken soup, but I don't want it to be like pasty. So for me, that 7 tablespoons of flour with this amount of liquid was just right. So I'm on like a simmer, like a medium low. And it has this really nice silky texture that you get not only from the flour butter roux, but also from using that bone broth and all the collagen. I can add my chicken. Again, very intentionally using dark meat because it's much less likely to dry out than chicken breast. And I'm adding it cooked because that is also going to control for moisture. So if you were to add like raw chicken to this mixture, you could because it's going to cook, but you're also adding moisture. So you have less control over the final texture of your pot pie filling, plus great use for leftover chicken. This mixture is already delicious, but one thing that makes it even more delicious is adding a little bit of heavy cream. Chicken pot pie traditionally has like a creamy chicken base. So I have a half a cup of heavy cream. If you end up adding more cream, you just run the risk of it having like so much fat in it that it mutes the flavor a little bit. So to me, half cup is kind of the right amount, sweet spot. You could do more or less, it's up to you. So now is when I'm gonna season. I'm gonna add a lot of black pepper. To me, black pepper is like a very important part of the flavor of this recipe. So I just added a little bit of salt. I'm gonna taste it. It's really so good. It's like so delicious. It does need more salt, but it's not like terribly under-seasoned. Basically, this is done. Everything else I can add off the heat. So I'm actually gonna turn it off. And I'm not worried about the chicken being under-seasoned because this is gonna get hot again in the oven and the chicken will kind of absorb the seasoning from the liquid. So this is a cup of frozen peas that ends up being like approximately half of a 10-ounce bag. So this is gonna add a little bit of heat. If you don't have Tabasco, you could put in like a little pinch of cayenne, but what I like about Tabasco, you could also use a different hot sauce, but I like that it's also adding a little bit of vinegar, probably like 6 or 7 dashes. But I'm gonna taste everything again. And this is also where you could pick out the thyme and the bay leaf. Probably should do that. I'm not worried about picking out every branch of thyme. I think you can just tell people like, hey, heads up, there might be a little sprig of thyme in your pot pie. I think it's a really nice ratio of like stuff to like filling base. So I added a little more salt, and add a little more Tabasco. There's like a tiny bit of heat in the palate at the end, but it could be a little more. And I think I'm good. I can also probably do a little more black pepper. I think that's sort of my final seasoning. I'm now just going to chop my parsley. The parsley honestly is like mostly for color. It's not like it's adding so much flavor, but I do like having it in there. You could leave it out if you wanted to and just don't feel like getting parsley for this purpose. But I like seeing the specks, and of course it adds a little something, a little freshness. But by the time everything cooks, it's like, it's been cooked a lot. If you can, I highly recommend making this in advance. Not only because, I mean, you kind of have to, because you really need the filling to be cold when you go to assemble it and put it in the oven, and I'll explain why. It mostly is related to the pastry itself. But also, the more that it sits, the better it's going to taste. So that those flavors are going to continue to kind of develop and meld as the filling sits. So it's just going to taste better overall. So if you can do this the night before, it's like an amazing dish for entertaining because it's impressive and you can do it ahead. Let me know if you see a thyme sprig. There's one.
Yep, there's one.
The filling is done. It makes about 2 quarts of filling. So this, if you're making it home, is going to go into containers. You can let it cool for a little bit first and into the fridge. And you'll notice that it will get quite solid because the flour, when everything gets cold, thickens a lot. And then you're going to start with cold pastry and cold filling. And we're going to assemble everything in my skillet, the same one that I used for poaching the chicken. Time to assemble everything to bake our pot pie. Again, pastry made ahead of time, cold. Filling made ahead of time, cold. I have my skillet here. I'm baking this as 1 large, just because I think it's sort of simplest, but absolutely you can make these in individual ramekins. I think it's great. My oven is preheated to 425, and I have a baking sheet already in there covered with foil because there will be bubbling and like butter drips. So the first thing I'm gonna do is roll out my pastry. Actually, the first thing I'm gonna do is make my egg wash. So I just have 1 large egg. Where'd my scrap bin go?
Oh, I put it over there for now.
I love these floors. Okay, so I have a pastry brush here, and I'm just gonna beat the egg until it's streak free. Okay, so you can see I also have a little bit of bench flour for rolling out. And, you know, not only is it just, do you want to make this ahead so that it's cold and to break up the work a little bit, but you just want the pastry to be really well rested so that you can roll it out more easily. So this is after 4 turns. 1, I think what I call book fold, and then 3 letter folds. So just a little bit of excess flour. And again, because this is nice and chilled, the butter is firm. I'm gonna kind of beat it. If you were making individual pot pies, what I would do is roll this out into a big rectangle and then cut squares and then do like square shaped lids over your ramekins. But for this one, I'm gonna cut a circle to fit my skillet. Okay, so that beating motion, same as with the butter before, it's really helping to soften everything without having to warm it up. You can see it's rolling out really nicely. No butter peeking through. If you see some butter peeking through, what you should do is take a pinch of flour and like pat it into that spot just to prevent sticking, but like it's not ideal. And definitely the colder it is, if you have some tearing, it's gonna be easier to roll out. But you do wanna, it's not the end of the world if you have some butter peeking out. So I have this rolled out to the thickness that I want. It's like a generous 1/8 of an inch. And it's not springing back, it's nice and cold. I wanna work quickly though, so this doesn't warm up. So I'm gonna cut this into a circle, and again, I'm gonna have some scrap. So what I think I'll do is just try to get the outline of the skillet in the dough. And I'll leave an overhang. The overhang is about maybe 1.5 inches. So again, save this scrap palmiers. Ah, I don't know where it went.
Bottom of your shoe.
Did I step on it? Probably. So now you want to work quickly because I don't want this pastry to warm up. And starting with cold filling is really important because what you do not want is hot filling cold pastry, because that pastry is going to immediately start to soften and the butter is going to melt, and you are not gonna get puffing, and you are also just going to get like undercooked pastry. So we're starting with cold filling. You can see how much it's set up, that it's quite thick. And of course it will, thin out and loosen up as it warms in the oven. And now, very important, see, here's a little sprig of thyme. This has a long bake time. So what you want is everything starts out cold and you start to get the puffing in the pastry. But what you need to do is cook it long enough that the filling also starts to bubble and boil, because that steam that's generated underneath is going to help cook the pastry from the bottom also. So you need that long bake time. And so my oven right now is on 425. Once the pastry starts to brown, I'll turn the heat down a little bit. So you can see that the filling fills the skillet, and that's why I have a baking sheet underneath for drips, because it will bubble. I'm actually going to egg wash the rim of the skillet to help it stick. I'm going to drape my pastry over the top. Okay, and now you could crimp this. Maybe I'll do a little crimp. The thing about puff pastry is much more even than pie dough, is it puffs. Is that a stupid thing to say? It's gonna puff up quite a bit. And so like a lot of times you lose definition. So like I'm doing a crimp, but the crimp is really here just to make sure that it stays in place and stays adhered to the lip of the skillet. I'm not gonna get the same definition. Just getting everything nice and together. Now some egg wash across the surface. This is gonna help with browning, of course. I don't have flaky salt. I didn't bring it with me, but if you had a little flaky salt, you could add that. I might do a little bit of black pepper on top. So I'm getting just that edge of pastry. So now maybe just a little bit of cracked black pepper on top. All right, so I'm just gonna cut, I'm gonna do kind of like a radiating pattern. And the slits are, of course, to let steam escape. Okay, so this is ready to go into the oven. Again, I have that sheet tray in there for drips. We want to get it in quickly because we don't want the pastry to warm up. So I'm on 425. This thing weighs an absolute ton. Oh my God. Okay. So in 20 minutes or so, I'm gonna check. And if I start to see browning on the surface of the pastry, I will turn it down to like 375. And then we'll keep going all the way through, but this will bake for a while. I think like 45 to 55 minutes total. So actually an hour and 10 minutes later, the pot pie is done. It did take longer than I thought. I kind of think it's the oven, but point is, bake to the indicator, not to the time. I let it go until the center was puffed and browned, so I know that the pastry is cooked. And then it was more like after 25 to 30, I turned it down from 425 to 375, and then it baked the rest of the way through. And I see bubbling in the center, so that's what I want. I'm gonna pull it out. Oh my goodness, this weighs a ton. Ah. Oh my gosh. It looks spectacular, I have to say. And I had some little butter drips, mostly from the pastry, but the pastry was well sealed, so I actually didn't have like spillover of any filling. This is insanely hot and we need to let it cool. But I'm super excited. You can see, if you look like down along the edge of the pastry, you can see all those layers separated in the slits, the separation layers. It looks really, really good. But this is so hot, like you do not want to eat this right away. We're gonna let it cool a little bit and that filling is gonna set up slightly. I would let this sit for like at least
3 hours.
15 minutes. There's a little spot here where the filling like bubbled up and pooled onto the surface of the pastry. That often happens. But overall, the pastry like got really nice and golden brown, and hear that in the center? It's fully cooked. Very excited. Has it been 15 minutes? It's close enough. What do you think the serving of this is? Like at least 8, right?
6.
A cup of filling plus 1/8 of the pie. 6 to 8 maybe, depending on your appetites. If you were doing individual, I would do 6. Okay, so I'm gonna spoon into the crust, just to this little corner. can see how flaky. Just listen to the sound. Oh my gosh, it looks really good. So actually, when serving, I would first remove the pastry and kind of set it off to the side. And then spoon the filling. I really should have rested longer. It's like pretty liquid. Way longer than I waited so that the filling sets up a little bit more and it's not like gonna burn your mouth off, but it's so tasty. I will eat this whole plate. I want to show you the pastry. So flaky. I just rip off a piece from the side. So comforting. I love having the thyme in there. And the filling, while still pretty hot, will continue to set up a little bit as it cools. You know, classic for a reason. The sauce has such a nice richness to it and really big flavor because I poached the chicken directly in there, so I'm preserving all that flavor, but also using the Kettle Fire chicken bone broth, which is like super long simmered using chicken bones, and it has a lot of collagen and a lot of flavor, so it's adding great body to the sauce for my chicken pot pie. You really can't go wrong. Such a comforting dish and fun to make, and also that perfect intersection of savory cooking and baking. And I do hope you give puff pastry a try, but understand if you want to go the store-bought route just to make this, but maybe leave puff pastry for another project. But just really fun to show you, really can kind of flex our pastry muscles. So I want to thank our friends at Kettle Fire for sponsoring this episode. You can check out the chicken bone broth, the whole line of bone broths, but also all of their products. If you go to the link in the description below, go to their website and you can get 20% off your final order. So thank you so much for watching. I'm very happy we're back with more episodes of Dessert Person. We'll be back in my kitchen at some point. We'll see. I just have to have a bigger house. And anyway, thanks so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.